So I'm not going to hang around I'm not going to talk too much. I'm just going to hand it straight over to Adam, and he's going to drive his slides himself this time. So kia ora and welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Tēnā koutou katoa. Nice to connect in with you all. What I'm going to attempt to do here now, Craig, if I can try and share this screen here. There, desktop 1. Share. Being on a Mac, I just have to allow that to happen. Share screen. Okay, so Craig, can you just reach out to me and see if you can actually see this? Does this work for you?
It's all good, Adam. We can see it.
Excellent. So, kia ora everybody. I just wanted to just first and foremost open this discussion around connectivity on Marae. Now, I just need to point out to everybody that this is my personal view, and to give you background on why I have the view of connectivity on the Marae, is that we've been working with the Pūmanawa Waru Education Trust for the last 7 years, trying to find ways of connecting our marae together. So I'll just start this first and foremost. What I want to discuss with you today is basically, obviously, marae connectivity, but I just want to run through a few things here. First and foremost, I sort of want to give you the backstory on the Pūmanawa Waru Education Trust, and which this is the trust that I work for. Why we decided as part of our project brief to focus on marae. 3, the how we engaged and what we learned whilst we were moving through this journey. Rest assured, the journey hasn't finished yet. Fourthly, our vision for moving forward. And then obviously, if we can wrap this up in the 30 minutes with a bit of a Q&A session. So I just want to start with the backstory here. You know, the Pūmanawa Waru Education Trust was originally funded by the Next Foundation, and we were tasked with trying to find a way to make Rotorua a great place to learn. And I can tell you now, the issues and the backstory behind that is quite massive, as you can imagine. Making Rotorua a great place to learn, we tried to find a way to bridge what we call a significant equity gap that exists within our rohe. And to give you some statistics straight off the bat there, what we're facing in our rohe alone is that we have around 15,000 learners in our area. Out of the 15,000 learners in the Rotorua area alone, we have close to an 80 to 82% Māori population. We have some of the lower socio-economic, lower decile count in our schools currently. And when we first started in 2015, we identified that being able to take learning beyond the school gate was a fundamental issue that existed within our community. Now, taking learning beyond the school gate has a number of components that are required to make that happen. The other side of that is that we understood that there were 5 fundamental components that Ngā Pūmanawa had to address in our community. One was around how our prominent leaders led inside of our community. If there was a want to change how we bridge the equity gap in learning. Secondly, we needed to think about how we engaged as a group with whānau and schools and community. Thirdly, we needed to think about how we built the capability within our community around how we use technology to connect to our children beyond the school gate and how we actually allow that to take place. Fourthly, we did obviously acknowledge the fact that technology played an absolutely massive part in ensuring that our children and our second chance learners at home could connect to learning. And that's where the Wi-Fi connectivity piece comes in. And then finally is the fifth component of our project. We had to think about how we measured the shift and how we could demonstrate that, in fact, with the introduction of great learning and pedagogy into our schools, great leadership and capability building in that space, and engagement, how we actually, if we injected those components into our communities, how would we actually know if we leveraged wealth and equity and what that measurement would look like. So that's a brief backstory of the Pūmanawa Waru Education Trust. We are based on what we call a collective impact approach, which is a case study built from Stanford University. And that is around how you use a collective impact approach to facilitate sustained change processes within a community. So with that approach in mind, my brief was around how do we actually ensure that technology can support great learning. So if you take that into the context of Marae, you'll start to connect the dots together and realize why we started off with education and community, but in fact, we end up pointing to Marae. So the first thing we had to do to understand what the deficit looks like in our community, we actually had to understand what the current state of our community is. And I can't push this enough, team. If you are thinking about building any kind of or facilitating any sustained change process within your community, you have to draw a line in the sand. You have to understand what the current state of your community is before you do anything. And I just want to point some things out, and this is off the top of my head. Post-COVID, when we came out of COVID level 4 in the Rotorua area, I went into our high schools and our schools to try and measure and understand what the impact of COVID had on them over the break. And the statistics are frightening. So to start with some statistics that are quite scary, as of today, we have 39% of Rotorua people receiving a benefit from our government post-COVID. Those statistics were given to us by the DIA. Principals commented on the fact that during the COVID lockdown, it was identified in the Wairiki area alone that 8,000 of our children were unable to connect back to their learning during lockdown. It's 8,000 across the Wairiki area, that's not just Rotorua. After the lockdown, levels were reduced to level 2 and to level 1 and schools returned. The next significant challenge that we have in our rohi is that 23% of our senior school students failed to return to school post-COVID. And a majority of our principals agreed the reason why they failed to return was the disconnection from their peers and their teachers over lockdown due to lack of connectivity. So that's a snapshot of the current state of Rotorua in which we're in. And I needed to give you the background as to why we focus so deeply on connectivity. So back to this current state. And so when we ascertain the current state of what the district would look like in the context of connectivity, we got some really, really interesting feedback from our marae. So to give you a sample size, we contacted 46 of our Arua marae, and we got feedback from them, and the other sample size were the 1,812 students we surveyed across our area. The interesting part about current state is that we understood in Rotorua area or the Bay of Plenty, Western Bay of Plenty alone, the data came back. It was quite interesting. We have a big problem here, and that is our children are frequenting marae less and less, other than in times of tangi. So with the advent of our Gen Y and Gen Z children, or our millennials and our Generation Z children, they're starting to become more disconnected and disenfranchised from their marae. And from a ngā Pūmanawa e Waru technology perspective, we felt that connectivity was a way to bring our children back to the marae. Now, granted, it's a small step, but in my narrow scope of expertise, I felt that that could be a way and an effective way to bring our children back. From a sustainability perspective, I guess you can understand that if our children are no longer frequenting our marae and our kaumata are getting older and older, it poses a significant risk for us. You know, and in simplicity, that risk is really centered around, you know, what happens to our hapu homes if nobody really understands where they came from and how they connect back to them. So secondly, one big issue that we had was we have a lot of hui. As you probably know, we have a lot of hui in marae, be it through the committee hui, be it through whānau hui, be it through hapu hui, whatever. And the biggest complaint that we had in the context of those committee marae meetings was that people were unable to actually make decisions because the committee members were unable to actually get to the meeting itself, which caused a whole slew of problems because obviously decisions couldn't be made because they couldn't hold quorum and they couldn't actually settle on any decisions. So that decision-making process of marae lengthened out considerably because people were unable to attend kanohi ki te kanohi face-to-face. Thirdly, there was a few comments made by our survey, or the data in our survey, that sort of suggested that there was a fear of when connectivity entered tapu ground, what the discipline would be behind that, and how would we discipline ourselves, you know, when between our tamariki, our children entering the marae and sitting there plugged into their phones all day versus the actual connectivity being used for what we intended it to be used for. Fourthly, the relevance or how applicable the technology would be once it entered the marae. And what we mean by that is that, you know, if you could imagine in marae, there are certain times that obviously connectivity is supported, and in other times there is a little bit of a concern around, you know, how technology is used. And to give you a classic example, the data that came back from the surveys were around, you know, what's acceptable in times of tangi, how can we use technology to stream out the process of tangi, and what's acceptable and what isn't. And then finally, some of the data commented on safety. You know, if we have technology and internet connectivity on tapu ground, on sacred ground, then, you know, what measures could the committees and our hapu put in place to ensure that the internet would be used for, would be conducive to their rules and beliefs. So that's what the current state data gave us. Very, very interesting. So as a result, everybody, what we came together with is what you see on your screen here, and that is, you know, what we had to understand, and what we understood very quickly was that I really want to make this, I really want this to be important, and I really want you all to understand this. For those of you that aren't connected in directly or whakapapa to any Māori, or any Māori culture at all. You need to understand that every Māori has, every marae has its own protocols. You know, if you think back in the day, every marae was basically a family home. Just as I have family values and I hold those dear in my own home, you know, Tino Hōpū marae has its own set of protocols that are completely different to Tamete Kapua, which is only 400 meters up the road. So that is something that we really needed to understand when we went to introduce connectivity into the marae. Every marae, every family has its own set of rules and its own way of doing things. Secondly, we needed to understand that we had to contextualize the technology to the needs of the hapu. And I think that really sort of lends itself to what I was talking about before. You know, you need to understand what the needs are of that particular marae. You cannot go over this and give a one rule applies to all approach. It simply won't work. And that comes into my next point here. You know, when we started to connect marae out to the internet, we absolutely needed to co-construct what the tikanga or the rules and the beliefs were behind how the technology would act to support them in their marae specifically. So I've just looked at the time, guys. I'm starting to slow down a little bit, so I want to speed through these. So finally, through the safety side of this, when we connect marae out, we really need to understand what those protocols are, what our marae actually want from the service, and what they deem as acceptable and what they don't. So just to recap how we went around understanding and why we did what we did, we took the current state. We went and consulted with our hapu around in our marae committees around what it was they wanted. We then looked at our te arawa overarching vision and asked ourselves at what point do they actually connect and meet, if they do, if they don't, and how do we actually go about building our connectivity solution on maraes so that it doesn't actually only meet the hapu vision, but it meets the overarching vision of the iwi. And forgive me, I'm talking in the context of te arawa, and if I was to give you an example of this is, you know, Ngāti Rangi Wewehi, we had to find out how they would then, their vision for their marae and their connectivity plan, how that would actually integrate and connect into the Te Arawa 2050 strategic vision. So as a result of that, what we decided to do across our Rotorua marae is that we built an open mesh unified wireless network to start. The wireless network is actually, from a technical perspective, we understood that a lot of our marae get hoha, they get annoyed with passwords and not knowing them and where they're connecting, where they're not. So we thought that we would make the job easier. So what we did do is we built what we call a cloud-based MAC radius authentication server. So that probably means nothing to many, but all it is that it's a server up in the cloud. It remembers the MAC or the fingerprint of the device it's connecting to on the network. It remembers it once, it keeps it, and then it doesn't matter which marae you walk into. If it is on the wireless network, it remembers your device and allows you to connect. Now, we really thought that this was very important. We know that a number of our people in our Arawarohi actually connect to a number of our marae, and we wanted to make that as easy for our children or as easy for our kaumātua as it is for our children. So then what we started to have to do when we realized when we connected these networks up is that you can't simply connect a marae. And I'll refer back to somewhere like Kiaro, which is out at the Horo Bluffs, just south of Rotorua. We realized that we can't just connect a marae. We have papakainga or whānau homes, family homes that are dotted around marae. We also have kōhanga reo, or our kindi, our Māori medium kindis that are close by, and we acknowledge that just connecting the marae was not the solution for allowing people to use connectivity to support their learning or to support their lives. So what we had to do in Rotorua is we actually had to start to look at using the marae as a hub, so that it was a point of presence that took a wireless signal to a marae. It then didn't only distribute it through the marae, but it also acted as a point of presence so that you could connect surrounding community from that. And I'll give you some examples in a few minutes on that one. So once we've done that, team, we've created what we call the technology platform. That's kind of stage one for us. Once we had created that platform, it was then time to start thinking about what I've said to you before, and that is actually how you contextualize the technology to the actual marae itself. So what we started to do is we started to build what we called our framework for how we co-constructed our kawa of care, or our care document, around what happens when you use technology on tapu ground. So we started to think about, you know, what's acceptable for Ngāti Whakaue in times of tangi. You know, how do they look up to hold meetings? How do they stream data? What would they want connectivity for and why? And once we understood that, we had to actually co-construct a document that sits with their committee, so that they have an actual, from their hapu specific code of conduct. This is their kawa of care document that actually says, you know what, this is where we draw a line in the sand as a hapu. This is what we want the technology for, and this is the code of conduct that we use when technology enters tapu ground. So then we started to think about this, and we thought, okay, if we've got this kawa of care document that's starting to be co-constructed with our hapu, we then start to think about how that technology can be used to bring whānau back. And for all of you, you all know this, and I'll put this in the context of all of us as New Zealanders. If that family home sits in Rotorua, we acknowledge that a lot of our whānau or family that connect back to that home have had to leave and move for, you know, professional decisions or for work or other requirements. What we needed to do is to find a way to use the technology to bring all those whānau back. Even if they can't be back in person, somehow use that technology solution to bring their people back and get them re-engaged with their marae. And then what we started to do with Aroa specific marae is we're starting to think about how we use that technology and connectivity to start immortalizing some of our stories and that are coming out of our marae. And I'll touch on these in a second anyway. So where we land, I just want to point this one out specifically. So if we have connectivity in the marae, and the outcome is everybody's sitting in the marae, we have children laying on the marae up front, enjoying technology, connected to safe, ultra-fast internet. We have some of our kaumātua there talking to someone or people about some of the history of the marae or the history of what happened in that area. We actually believe as the Ngā Pūmanawa Waru Education Trust that we should try and look at how we use technology to immortalize those stories. So what we've done specifically in Aroa, and I'm telling everybody this so that hopefully you'll take some of these ideas and you'll take them back to your own areas, but what we actually did is we used our connectivity platform across the Aroa area to build what we call the Great Te Aroa Stories website. So essentially what we did is we took 52 stories, or we took our marae, we talked to our kaumātua on those marae, and we actually co-writ 52 stories that are immortalized the stories of Te Arawa, and some of the stories that are pertinent to some of our marae. Team, you're welcome to go and have a look at that. It's called www.gtas.nz, which is Great Te Arawa Stories. And for us, that was a way of actually not only immortalizing some of the stories that were coming out of Te Arawa, but actually connecting those stories back to the marae. And then we realized that once we do that, we have a global stage now. We have the ability for people that are really interested in what Marae and Māori life looks like. They can come, they can connect into those GTS stories, then in time reconnect back to those marae that were actually the source of these beautiful stories. So then what we have, and why I'm telling you this, is that we are having some of our marae now that have connectivity, and because they have connectivity, they're starting to actually capture these stories on video. And they're starting to use those stories. Some of them are thinking about how they live stream those stories out of their marae, and also how they live stream some of their waiata and some of their beautiful music. And once again, team, this is absolutely impossible without connectivity. So I just want to touch very quickly upon this because I think we're running out of time. But one thing that we really want to think about, and this is in alignment with the Te Arawa 2050 vision, we really want to think about how we build equity inside of our marae. What we have started doing in the Arawa area especially is to say, okay, if you have ultra-fast connectivity being delivered to your marae, it's unlimited, it's without obstruction, you know, how do we look to connect people beyond ourselves? And the way we think about doing that is, it's very simple. We're starting to install widescreen TVs, webcams, conferencing facilities into our wharekais and our wharenuis, our marae, so that we can actually start to think of this marae as a system for being able to reach out to other people in real time using internet connectivity. And secondly, you know, we wanted to think about how we could position a marae so that we could have other parties interested in actually coming down for cultural exchanges, maybe even some of our New Zealand organisations coming in and thinking of the marae as a place where they can connect to each other and to people using the internet. So that was kind of where we were thinking about building equity. I just want to give you a very quick real world example of what we've done in the context of one of our marae and what this actually means. So we have Tarimano Marae, which is out at Awaho. The hapu is Ngāti Rangi Wewahi. They contacted us a couple of years ago now, and they needed to be connected to the internet. So how we connected them is we actually, there's no fibre in the area. So what we did is we took the Network for Learning filtered fibre out of Te Kura Kaupapa Māori or Te Koutu, and we beamed that up to our maunga, our mountain up on Ngongataha. And then what we did is we then beamed that down to Te Koutu. And then what that provides that particular marae with is ultra fast, highly filtered internet. And to give you real world statistics, they're enjoying 700 megabytes per second, a bridged link, wireless link at 700 megabytes a second back to Te Koutu. Network for Learning are more than happy for us to use that fibre as it is connecting to what we call a second chance or place of learning. But what's really fascinating about all of that, guys, is that once you get connectivity in, you get buy-in from the whānau or the hapu, and they start really trusting what that technology can do to support their kaupapa. You start to understand that they have some amazing aspirations. So if you have a look down there on the icons below, what you'll see is what they've actually tried to achieve or what they want to achieve. So in the context of some of our marae, for example, we have our marae using our wireless networks to feed their river sensors so that they can monitor in real time oxygen levels in their adjoining rivers beside their marae, so that they can understand what the health of their area looks like. That coupled with some of our other marae are using the wireless networks now to monitor the power generators inside of the rivers and the like. So what I'm trying to articulate to you here is that it is not just about connectivity. It's about creating a platform so that our marae can innovate and achieve some of their dreams and aspirations. So I might try and close this down here because I know I'm over time. Essentially, what we've learned, I cannot stress to you all enough, is that you cannot prescribe connectivity to hapu. You simply can't. This has to be a co-constructed process. If you're a telco and you're walking onto a marae and, hey, team, I've done it. You walk onto a marae, and just because you think connectivity is important, don't expect everyone else to, because you will be met with pitchforks. You have to co-construct what it looks like, and you have to co-construct it and contextualize it to the needs of the hapu. Just want to close this, team. The most exciting thing that I found is that we originally connected our Te Aroha marae, or some of our Te Aroha marae up, with the thought that it would engage our children, but in fact 40% of our users on that marae network are over the age of 60 years. So great insight. Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Adam. I've got time for one question, if you can take it.
Yes.
How much is the rural-urban digital divide extra hard to deal with when the schools you deal with are low decile and therefore there's less money around?
Well, Craig, from my perspective to answer that, since 2015, since we started this, we've said we have a plethora of connectivity solutions. The government is offering, rural broadband investments and whatnot. But guys, that doesn't solve our problem. Internet for our lowest decile children needs to be for free. And that's it. It needs to be for free, and it needs to be in abundance. And if we can find a way as a country to get every individual inside of Aotearoa connected to the internet, irrespective of whether they can afford it or not, we've won.
All righty. Hey, thank you so much for your time today, Adam. Great hearing from you and great hearing the stories, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you more. Adam's going to be involved with us working out our Connected Marae program that we're working forward on. So thank you again. Kia ora.